My name is Maneet and I am a third-year medical student at St. George's University School of Medicine. I just finished my pediatrics rotation, so I thought I would just make a video and just share some information on how the rotation was structured, how I studied, how I was evaluated, and just any overall tips or advice that I have going into this rotation. So let's get started. So in terms of how this rotation was structured, it is 6 weeks long. For my rotation, I was placed at an outpatient clinic, and essentially our expectations and requirements were that we would go see the patients by ourselves, we would do the HPI, we would do the necessary physical exam, and then kind of figure out what we thought was going on and what medications or like next steps were required for the patient. So whether that was a referral to another specialist, whether that was just a medication, whether that was a scan, and we kind of figured this out on our own, and then we would go and present it to the provider. So then we'd go over, kind of explain what we thought was going on, why we thought this was the diagnosis and the treatment and the next steps. And then we would go back into the patient's room with the provider and just go over what we discussed, and if there was anything that maybe we did wrong or we weren't quite accurate on, then the doctor would kind of fix that or change up. But overall, because you kind of got like the hang of things and kind of what to do in which situation, that by the end of it, I felt decently comfortable telling a patient what their treatment was or telling the doctor that this is what I think is going to be going on. And by the end of it, like most of the time what you were saying or thinking or your rationale was correct. So that was something that was like really nice to see, just to see how proven how your skills and thinking improve and get better with that practice and that exposure. At this outpatient clinic, with the way that our schedule was, we would go in at about 9 a.m. and then we would be done by about, depending on when the last patient was, in between 4 and 5 p.m. We got a lunch break, and there were other medical students there was NP students, and there were PA students. So there was always a good group of students, and you could talk things through and just go over thought process, and it was nice to bounce off ideas off of each other. So how a typical work day looked like. So I used to wake up around 6 a.m. and then I would get ready for the day, and then because I am located in LA, there would be a lot of traffic. So I used to aim to leave in between about like 7:45 and 7:50 just to give myself extra time. I used to get there with like 15 minutes to spare, but in a given day, if there was too much traffic or whatever, at least I had some extra wiggle room. I came home, usually on the days that I had work, there wasn't much time to study, but in the downtime at work, I used to try to go through my Anki cards. And then on my days off, which was a couple of days in the week, I used to just do as many UWorld questions as I could and just study UWorld, study, catch up, run errands, and things like that. Now in terms of how I studied and what resources I used. So I'll kind of go through all the resources like one by one. So AMBOSS, like in internal medicine, we had assigned quizzes by SGU. So for these quizzes, I used to do them on the weekends. I would do the quiz on the weekend, and then I used to review the quiz on the same day. So this was something that I changed a little bit from internal medicine, just because this rotation is shorter and you still have a lot of UWorld to get through. So I used to spend just 1 to 2 days on the weekend, so just my weekend, just doing AMBOSS. So I would do the AMBOSS quiz, and then I would try to review it that same day. And if I didn't, then I would review it like the next day of the weekend. So that was how I did AMBOSS. For UWorld, I started UWorld, I wanna say like sometime in the first or second week of the rotation. Just, you know, it takes some time to get into the swing of studying, how that schedule is gonna be, work, and all that. So once I had started UWorld, I would aim to do at least a block a day. And with this, it just worked because I kind of calculated how many questions I needed to do. So most days, when I was doing UWorld, my minimum was a block. So on days that I was completely free, on work days, maybe I would do like 10 questions at the most. But on the days that I was off, I was doing at least 40, and on some days I was doing 80. With this schedule, it allowed me to be done UWorld with about 1.5 to 2 weeks before my shelf exam at the end. So with UWorld, so I would do the questions, I would review, and then I always had a Google Doc, and that's what I used to review. So I would color code different things, like different things for risk factors, treatment, labs, different color, pathology. And I would just kind of go question by question, making these notes as I was doing my UWorld questions. So that's how I did for UWorld. Once I was done all of UWorld and I had about 1 to 2 weeks left, I went back and I started reviewing those notes that I made for UWorld. So what I had done is, let's say I had cardiology. I would read over those notes, try to understand and memorize that information, and then I would go back and do the incorrect questions from that UWorld subject and see if I was actually retaining and if I was actually learning. So this was when I was done all of the UWorld. Then I went back, reviewed my notes, and did my incorrects. So by the time I was done with my studying, I would say I'd probably done about 3 passes of the content. And when I was done all UWorld and I felt like I had done all the incorrects and I had gone over my UWorld notes that I had made, I used Melman's PDF documents online. So I used just the last pages of his document where he had everything bullet pointed. This was a good way for me to rapid review all the content, see what I knew, see what I didn't know. And if there was anything that I was confused about, new to me, things I hadn't seen, then I would maybe go back and look at my UWorld notes, maybe do a video. But honestly, I thought it was sufficient with the system that I had, that I didn't need another external resource. For pediatrics, I didn't watch any review videos. I just ran out of time, and I wish if I had time, I would have watched maybe a Dr. High Yield video, an Emma Holiday's video, or one of the very popular videos that we have floating around on YouTube for our shelf exams. And then for the NBME exams, I did a couple of those once I was done all of UWorld. So in the process of doing my incorrects and doing my UWorld content, I sprinkled NBMEs through that time. So I would do an NBME and I would try to review it that same day, but honestly, some days I just couldn't, so I would just finish it over the next couple of days. And then for Anki, I was doing about 50 cards every day from when the rotation started. And then again, a couple weeks out, it was just a matter of doing the reviews and there was no new cards. So that is kind of how I studied and how, what resources I used for this rotation. And then in terms of how I was evaluated, you have your mid-core exam and your shelf exam. So like the other rotations, your mid-core exam is based on AMBOSS. So what I did is I would review my quizzes the weekends when I did them, but then the weekend before my mid-core is I just quickly went through AMBOSS, and then I used the notes that I had made for UWorld to study, just because I felt like those were more thorough. And so the weekend before my mid-core exam, I just went over all those subjects that were tested on AMBOSS that I had in my UWorld notes, and it was sufficient. My mid-core went well. I felt like that was fine, and that was what worked for me. So although your mid-core is focused on AMBOSS, I used my UWorld notes, but I studied the topics that were in the AMBOSS quizzes. I just didn't make thorough AMBOSS notes. So it was hard for me to use AMBOSS to review because I didn't have thorough notes that I made myself. So that's why I used my UWorld notes. And then you have your shelf exam. So for the shelf exam, it's just everything that you've been doing during the rotation, and then you have your shelf exam and you're tested. And this is at the end of your rotation, and you have to do it at a Prometric center. And then for both mid-core and your shelf, you have about 2 hours and 45 minutes, and they are 110 questions each. For your mid-core exam, that is gonna be, because this is a 6-week rotation, it's at your 4th Monday, and then your shelf exam is at the very end of your rotation. The mid-core is made by SGU. So SGU-like questions. Your shelf exam is made by NBME, so it's NBME-like questions. So that's just something to be mindful of when you are studying and preparing. So then you also have your case write-ups. For pediatrics, there were 2. All the details of what to include, how to structure are in your syllabus. So please take a look at your syllabus and follow those exact guidelines. There were 2 for pediatrics. Then you have patient encounter logs. On Sakai, there's a table and it lists every single patient encounter log that you need to complete for pediatrics. Please follow that. Make sure you're following it where it says diagnosis and where it says complaint and where it says which setting you saw this in. And make sure you follow that exactly when you are inputting everything into the software. And for your case write-ups and your patient encounter logs, for my term or for my rotation, they were due 1 week after the rotation was done. So just be mindful of deadlines and requirements and guidelines, and take a look at your syllabus before you complete these. None of these things were difficult. It was just little busy work, all very manageable. And then in terms of how you were evaluated, there are 2 different forms that you are required to get completed by your preceptor, and you submit them online. Again, this is all in your syllabus, so make sure you are meeting the guidelines and you are meeting the deadlines of how to upload and when to upload. So that is kind of just how like pediatrics was. I love pediatrics. It's great seeing little kids. And so like always, when starting a new rotation, it can be a little bit scary. You don't know who you're working with. You don't know how that doctor functions, what their requirements are, their expectations are, how everything is structured, what like you're going to be expected to do. But again, go in with an open mind. You will not be alone. The staff is always great. You'll always have medical students around you or other fellow peers with you. So keep an open mind. Know that you got this. You are so capable and you are going to make a great physician. Thank you.